right there. You can delete props from there. You can modify it. You can return a new props object from what is there. You can, if you notice, I've only returned functional components, but you don't have to. You can return classes. Class is also a valid React element, and you could do that, and that means you could add state. You could add state to a functional component, which meaning that you could have, like, has it happened to you that you have a functional component and then you say, oh my god, but I wish it had a state, but now I have to change it to a class and it becomes not a function. You can prevent that. I'll show you in a minute. You can also add life cycles because you can return classes with hooks and you can keep everything functional. So very important because there's ways to do this wrong. How to properly implement a high-order component. Very important first, don't mutate the input. That's general in React and functional programming. You never mutate the input. Imagine you were changing the prototype in the home. You were like saying input component dot prototype dot render and whatever. That is very dangerous because you are modifying a component and then two hooks could fight each other. It's a mess. This is not the way. Now, as an example of a high-order component that is really useful, I wanted to present Connect, which is the React Redux basic method. I put a raptor because it's both fascinating and scary, like Redux. This is basically Connect. It's a bit simplified, but this is Connect. This is React Redux that we all like a lot. You pass a map state to props, and then an input component, and then return a class instead of a function. You need this. So, what's happening here? Is everyone aware of what is context in React? Literally, the context object in React. I won't raise hands. Okay, so in React, basically you can pass in the most normal way to get something is from props. You pass props, and then the children has it. Then the children can pass it to its children, and then you pass it through. But that's super annoying. Imagine you wanted to pass the store, the Redux store, to a very children component. You don't really want to pass the store to everyone, like through all the trees. So you either make it a global. Don't make it a global. We actively discourage this in Infantil because we want to like have server-side rendering. How would server-side rendering work if you have a global? Because it's different users at the same time. So what you do is there's a third option between props and like global object, which is context. Context is something from React. You basically put things in context in the most parent component. You said you implement a method. I think it's called getChildrenContext, and then you put everything there that should be in context. Then the children of that object, like without using props, could say, I want that bit of context, and I will use it. And then you don't have to go through all that, passing the props all the way down. So that's what I'm doing here. And this basically means that store is going to be in context. Okay? You'll see how it's consumed here. Basically, this .context or store in this class has the store, the Redux store. Okay? And it's now here in this.store. Now, I'm creating this .state and saying it is map state to props this.store.getState. Well, this.store.getState basically has the state of your app. That's your whole app. That's super cool. Map state to props basically filters whichever part you want from the app, from the store, from the state, and takes it out. You can see an example here, which I'm going to explain below, but maybe it's worth looking at. Map state to props is this function you probably have implemented if you've used Redux, which takes a bit of the state and you use a selector, and then you have like the number of raptors, which everyone wants to know. So you have this.state, okay. And then also I subscribe to the store. So when the store gets an action, it will call this function, and I say state, set state, it should be this.getState. And I set the state here, okay? I say when the store changes anything, I'm subscribed, so I will get this will get called, and I will update the state of this higher order component. And then in here, in the render method, this is the cool. well, the essential part. Like, I basically pass the props that come here, but also I add the state. So if you notice when you use connect, you consume the things you connect to as props, not as state, because basically they are passed like this. They are spread and they are put into your object. So this is, if you notice, I haven't done the map action to map dispatch to action, something like that. The ones like this has not done the action part. It's basically to make it a bit simpler, but it wouldn't be like crazy hard to do it. Just simplify it. There's one thing I am omitting here on purpose because it would make it more complicated. When you use React DevTools, if you use them, who hasn't used React DevTools? Who has not used, or okay, who has used React DevTools? Oh, most people, that's fine. So then you would see extended component in your React DevTools, and like, what if everything is called extended component? That's like not very useful. And that has a solution that I omit for simplicity, but you basically implement display name, and then you can just add this, and this is the string. You could put whatever you want, and you can even somehow get the parameter here to give a more specific name, and then you have a connected function with a proper name, and then you would see in React DevTools connected list. Okay, another example. I told you, I promised that state could be omitted, that you never need to have state again. It's true. With this hook is implemented in several libraries, in Recompose and some of the kind, and some from this guy here, which we use in Fandu. And it's cool because basically you parameterize it with an initial state, okay? And then you get the input component. It's always this pattern. Take an input component and return a new component, which renders it. You see in the render, you always render the same. So what happens here? You are creating a state in this hook, which is the initial state you passed. And then here, you pass an extra prop, which is set state. I'm binding this for context JavaScript thing. And then I'm passing the state too. Well, okay, I don't know if you can foresee exactly what's going to happen, but look at this. I have this dual raptor view, boring view, which takes two props that come from the outside, called set state and raptor. Okay, so when you click the div, you will update this. Okay, so if the raptor was like, I don't know what I put in the beginning, nothing, it's null. When you click it, it will say something. So, oh yeah, here. So with state raptor cinnamon, okay. This means that when you consume Amazing Raptor View, literally when you call JSX Amazing Raptor View, it will have a state. It will have this state, and you didn't need dull Raptor View to have any state. That is important. When I started using hooks, this made me realize that you can put most of the logic and the brains of the app in hooks, and then the views become just views. They do nothing. They're super boring. There's just nothing. Just this. It's just consuming props. Everything comes from the outside. And there's danger point. I put all the hooks here, in the same level as the component. I've never enhanced a component in the render method. That's why. That's because when you enhance a component, you're basically returning an anonymous class. This class is created, if you call this in render method, this with state, basically you would be creating a new component every time. Meaning that React would, that has a different reference. It's a with state, but it's different with state. So React would think, oh, that's a completely new component. You change component, I have to re-render everything. And it would destroy the whole tree. So you very generally I've never been in a situation where I needed to call a hook in a dynamically invoked method like life cycles or render. I've always done it outside, at the same level where the component is created. And that's another reason for this is testing. What does this mean for testing? This is amazing for testing. This is really good news for testing. Because you test the hook. You test the hook severely. The hooks are complicated, so you test them well. It's not too hard. It's even with state, which will handle the whole state of your local state of your application. It's not too many lines, but you can still test it. And you test without anything else. You test it in isolation, and then you test the dump components. And because the dump components, because the hooks injected probes to the dump components, you don't need to test them both together. You don't need to test how the state works in a dump component because it's trivial. This dollar raptor view that I showed you before, I can just pass this. I could even mock set state. It's easy. And then, did you see how it was implemented? I just pass it. Normally, when you consume it in the full app, it's passed in a higher order component, but you don't care. You're just testing that part. So it's a very simple test. So this means that you can test in isolation the hook and the dump components, which are really simple. So it's really easy to test. And then when you integrate this all together, yes, you need some infrastructure to like have hooks and everything, but well, integration tests are not easy anyway. This means that you can test the hooks very strongly, and every time you add state to a component, you don't need to test that part, which is a great benefit. You never test, you never have to test what the hook does, because that's tested in hook. Okay, there's a problem. This pattern is wonderful, I love it, but so trade-offs. Every time you call a hook in your React DevTools, you will see another node. You will see, for example, with state, you will see with state and Raptor view. If you call connected on top of that, you will see connected with state Raptor view. What's going on? You're creating React nodes. It's not divs, but it's nodes. So React needs to deal with them, and it does add a performance cost because if each of them has life cycles, they all have to get called and they all need to re-render. So it does have a cost, but how much is it? Okay, squashing is the technique I'll show you now that can make this very, very efficient. It was, so I'll explain now. Squashing is basically, I first saw it by the guy of Recompose, who also co-authored Redux, and I think it's called Andrew Clark. Basically, instead of here, remember I return a JSX thing. This is the identity hook from before, but now I instead of using JSX, I'm calling the input component, meaning that since it's a function, I call the props, and it just returns things. So this is not creating any React node. JSX is implicitly converted to React.createElement. This is not happening here. I'm literally calling it, and so there's no node. But what if input component is a class? Then this fails. Okay, this crashes. It wouldn't work. Then let's make it a bit more complicated. This is a helper function. I'll point you a repo for it. With this or Recompose is better. And then you can do this. You can return what you call here. If it's a function, if it's not a function, you create the instance and return the render method. No, this is wrong. This is super wrong. If this tempted you, it's totally wrong. It's very dangerous. This wouldn't have any lifecycle methods. This is very dangerous. And I try to call the lifecycle methods myself. Because this is just calling render. It's not ever calling any other methods of the class. So I try to hook up those lifecycle methods to the hook and making complicated stuff. It's not worth it. It's definitely not worth it. And what I ended up doing in the end was this. So if it's a class, just live with it. And if it's a function, squash it. That's fine. That's safe. This is totally safe. And then what's the result? So I made a little experiment. I made a website, which is 500 elements table. 10% of them update every second. I thought it was a good model for a website because in a website, normally not everything updates. And then each of the elements has 40 hooks on them. And I'm using React performance tools to measure it, to measure how performance it is. This will tell you the render time and the wasted render time. The wasted render time is when you render something, but actually the DOM didn't change. So what I tried? I tried hooks that are functions and hooks that are classes to see if there's any difference because functions don't have life cycles. Also, I tried if the class was a pure component or a component. If you're not aware, a component will render every time you pass new props. A pure component will check if the props are the same as before, shallow compare. And if they're the same, they will not render. They will say, no, it's the same, because it's pure. So why should I bother? Because it's pure. Most of the things we use are pure. What happened? There's a typo. This should be wasted render time. Okay. So what happened? When I was using also the item I used, although this had no difference at all, basically the base child, I tested it with an impure item, pure item, or functional item, meaning like a function, a pure class, or an impure class. So what happened was like with impure higher order components, meaning a hawk that takes an input component and returns a class that extends component. That was really inefficient because every time you pass some props, and basically that's every second in this grid, it needs to, no matter if you actually get an updated number, which is like the first column, or the rest, because you get new props, you re-render everything, and it's 40 hawks per element, so it was very inefficient. It was about 2 milliseconds, 2 seconds, and the wasted time was the same, meaning that you never, like, this approximate, actually the inclusive renderer was a bit higher, but nothing. Basically, when you use higher order component with an impure component, you're actually you're adding extra renders that you don't need. And this made me think one thing: impurity is not bad. Impurity is useful when you use it. When you actually do something impure, like reading from a file or like getting something external, you need impurity, but it has a cost. And most of the times we don't use impurity. We don't profit from it. So if you don't profit from it, fall back to another default, which is pure. Look, I mean, the pure component, the pure hawk, this was just, instead of in the class, so in the class that returns in the hawk that returns the class, instead of extending component, I extend pure component, just that, which is like completely backwards compatible. The performance was so much better. It was crazy. Like 100 milliseconds, it's totally fine. And this was an excessive amount of hogs. 40 hogs is crazy. You might have 10 hogs, and that's already a lot, and definitely not in all your components. And also more interesting, the wasted time was 0, because when you pass the same props, the pure component doesn't re-render, so there's no wasted time. So if you were actually rendering something, if you like need the hogs, if the hogs are like doing some logic, and then there's no wasted time, it means that the hogs are working, they're doing whatever they want to do, they need to do, so it's fine. Now with squashing, it was like incredibly fast. Why? Because basically, since you just call the function instead of calling React.createElement, it's just adding nothing to React. This is I didn't check. I should have. This is probably the performance of having no hooks at all, because since it's squashing, it's just calling functions. A function call is nothing. So basically, the performance cost is 0, but the wasted time is some. And this is, I was really shocked. And this is because React creates functional components as impure components, which was really shocking for me, because it means actually a pure component is more functional than a function. Basically, when you have a functional component and you call it twice with the same props, it will re-render, which is okay. Anyway, it was much faster because this meant that, remember, only the first column was re-rendering, and that took about 100 milliseconds. Here, they were all re-rendering, but effectively in the first column there were like 40 hooks per item, and here there were like 0 hooks. There's nothing. It's like 500. It's nothing. So squashing is really efficient, but you sometimes need classes for like life cycles and state. I created another table which explains this, I think, in a better way. It's a new metric I made up, snappiness. It's measured in emojis. So basically, when I was scrolling and I was using the impure hooks, it was crap. Therefore, so it felt really bad. I felt the difference. It was really bad. With the pure hooks, stars. It was really soft. I couldn't feel any difference. And with the squashing hooks, like sparkles and stars, it's the best. It's the best. It's really good. Basically, these two are already really good. And then pure hogs are dangerous. Probably in most of apps it wouldn't have any effect, but it is a waste of time to use a pure hog if you don't need it. So pure hogs are probably the safest choice because squashing is complicated and yeah, it could be dangerous if you don't do it properly. So I would say pure hogs are the best. Now, thank you, and if you want any of the code is there, and any questions, welcome. Right, questions? Anyone? Questions? Come on, we need questions.
How have you found hawks useful in FanDuel? Where have you used them? Like ones you've written yourself?
Well, so we use them extensively. We use them pretty much all the time. What I said about like putting the logic in hooks and the view in the functional components is not overstatement. We literally do that all the time. And this is not something based on a theory. I started using them, I didn't know them, I didn't understand them, and then I started seeing more and more, and I had that realization that, wow, we don't need to do anything in the components. There was one more little thing, it's a bit speculative, but it's really interesting. Hooks are plain JavaScript, meaning that you can share them with, let's say, React Native. So we even had the idea, and we proof tested a bit, and it's amazing, that you can write your views in React Native or React, but then put all your logic in hooks, and the hooks are plain JavaScript. Export them, consume them, and it worked, and that's really cool.
What's your favorite?
I like with state because I forgot how to write classes long ago.
Have you actually felt like a performance hit from not using hooks in production, or has the performance hit only really come from your testing? Have you noticed that?
Oh no, actually, we have used for a long time pure components, but we never really went for it. It was a guess, smart guess, because it was true. But yeah, we never noticed anything in production. I just tested it and it's true.
So you're talking about with hooks, you quite multiple component instances. Have you thought about classical inheritance?
Yes, there's another possibility. I know that's what you're asking. You can, when implementing a hook, imagine instead of returning a completely new component, you extend the input component. You can do that. And have you guys heard of Radium, the CSS library that has inline styles with hover? Well, mildly popular, much less than I thought. It uses that. Basically, you pass a component, and then it extends it, and I will add on hover, on all these things. And yeah, it does that, but I was unsure about it. I talked with my colleagues. They didn't think it was a good idea. I asked Dan Abramov on Twitter, and he said, nah, don't do it. And so I wasn't very sure, and it seems many people are not for it, so nah, don't use inheritance.
You mentioned that functional stateless components can be less performant than pure class components, which makes sense because when you pass in new props, even if they're not really new, it will just call a component again. And React doesn't really have any insight into what's supposed to rewrite them because there are no lifecycle hooks. So I was thinking maybe if you have lots of these and you know a way, an easy way to check if the props have changed, you can maybe wrap them in a memoizer, which caches them the results for these props, which if you have lots of them nested, it could actually improve performance.
That's a really cool idea. I think in a way, pure components have to do that because basically it will break the re-render chain, so it will just return what was already there.
I guess so. Probably.
And no, but that's really interesting.
You need a pure hawk.
Yeah, basically when you wrap a pure, it exists already, and in Recompose, but it as a side effect, when you wrap any functional component in a pure hawk, it will become pure, because the parent will be the one receiving the props. and like the enhanced version. So when it will see that it received the same prop twice, it will never bother to call the children. So since we use hogs all the time, I haven't measured, but I think it's not a problem for us.
Questions? Questions about FanDuel? Answer that too. Nope, any interests? Cool. One of our sponsors, like I mentioned before, is Get Kraken. Now that one. So thank you, Gerard. If anyone wants to go for a quick break, beers, toilets, or some beers here, somewhere in there. Just while we set up the next speaker. It's a quick one. Any Android charger? No? Android chargers?
Yeah, I'm right.
Right,
Yeah,
sorry.
good to meet you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we want experienced React developers. So yeah, if you give me your details, I'll. Okay. Oh, brilliant. Yes. Yeah, I love to. I love my suitcase. If you have your details, I'll get it.
But I can write something down.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Which Deutschland kann Baby fahren.
Okay,
Ja, meine Bank kommt aus
okay, yeah.
You know the government. My
Yeah, it's a small agency in they have these clients who want to
Strange thing, they were looking for 2 people.
Yes, if I find you a piece of paper, then
So we're happy with both of us, to be honest. So, yeah, it's kind of a bit of an upper stick. Due to your background, I think I get it. Yeah, pretty cool. Just get back to I think it's chat time. So that's difficult. Because the thing is, they used Firebase. Firebase listeners on database. It's like having a very interactive database. So whenever things change, the back end automatically responds. Although it's really awkward because it's since you has to have this kind of listener to change state. So you have to tell React to you guys that this is the state and it's like that. Okay. I did in the end just because yeah, why not? Although they kept it weird when they jump right next to the
keep some flavors for years. You may have an edge on yes, they give you something that looks like assembly. Essentially, it's like moving data points. Say, move this to this data point. Then there's four tasks. One was like
Is that there? Yeah. Sorry.
Then he gave me a code test and I replaced it. But like, they asked me to write out a function two pages of code that had a line with the structure. That was the whole idea. These are things you should spot. Like any programmer will spot that it's got indented.
Yeah, we just did.
Yeah, well, it's just not here. Like it's more a case of well, there you go. Yeah, it's quite
That's always the point. I saw you this 3% cheap.
Okay, guys, shall I start? Anyone, if any last few beers, if anyone wants to help themselves, please do now.
There is more, just
There is
don't tell anyone outside of this room that you took them.
okay, cool.
The nice ones.
Good, yeah. So, I went a bit ambitious. The talk is about React to React Native, and it's called Yoga for Beginners. Guys, do they look? I said.
go for it.
So React to React Native, it's more from my perspective, from someone who did React before and then they jumped to React Native. So the question would be, how many here did React but not React Native? Okay, cool. How many did both React and React Native? Cool. So I'm pretty sure there will be people more experienced. That's the problem. I didn't know the exact level, but hopefully everyone will come up with something from it. So the talk is React Native, and the ambitious part was that I thought that to build the presentation as a React Native app, so a little bit over the top, but so is React. So, so here is this is the app in an emulator, and it's called Yoga for Beginners. I am Muzaffar, that's Kamaros, and I also teach at a project called Code Your Future. It's a coding school for refugees and asylum seekers. We'll get back to it again, but I'm also a JavaScript developer. I work now as a contractor at Tesco Bank. I just moved to Edinburgh. And this talk, about React Native, and the app that we built with that. I built this app with a friend. It's called Dawa. It's so I'm from Sudan, and this is an app that we built that basically we do this small shop that we build things that we call, ironically, to solve third world problems, like problems that 90% of the people in the room here probably don't know about, but 90% of the people in the world would know, specifically back home. So this is an app, like a social network, a problem that happened that people they can't afford medicine, and then people started sharing on Twitter that, hey, do you have this medicine? And other will say, hey, this medicine, I have an extra of this, and very informal. So we built this app to make an app for people to do that, basically. And we used React Native for doing that. So we built the app called Dawa, which means medicine in Arabic. It's an Android app only, but still we chose to do React Native. I'll come to that. The most important factor was we want to build it very quickly. We built it over 6 weekends between me and him. He lives in Korea. He's my best friend from childhood. And it has to be, it's in Arabic mainly, so right to left with all the challenges that you get from having right to left applications. The stack is Node, React, Redux. We use Code Push and we love it. And yeah, so why React Native? The decisions was native, Cordova, React Native, or hybrid against native. Native was not an option for us, just the learning curve, the time, everything, even though it's just Android. I did a lot of work with Cordova and Ionic before in previous jobs in bigger projects, and I didn't mind it. I quite liked it, but for this we chose React Native because we both did some React, and we thought to learn something new. And we didn't regret it. It's amazing. It's really nice experience. So the amazing part is performance is actually really good. It's not something theoretical. When we were doing that Cordova app, you could feel straight away that actually the touch is bad. It doesn't feel native. You feel it's sluggish from the start. You have to make an effort to make it not sluggish. Ionic makes it better, but there are issues, especially for Android, and back then that Android, the web, it depends, it's web view basically, so it depends on the web view that comes with the Android mobile. Older ones before 4 point something, they had an older version, not the Chrome one, which is way slower. And then to solve that, you bundle it with Crosswalk. Crosswalk makes it the same experience everywhere. But then you have a browser with your package, and it went on for that project from 3 megabyte to about 9 megabyte, 10 megabyte, just because of bundling Crosswalk. And even bundling it was a hassle. Now it's easier with Ionic, but it was a hassle to do that. And even then, the performance is not very good. React Native is different. It's not WebView. It uses components that maps to native components. So we write JavaScript, but what the user get at the end is native components. It feels straight away. It feels much better than anything hybrid or so. So the performance, especially with the touch and so on, you see it very quickly. Dev experience is amazing. Like you see now, I'm running in an emulator. I can tell it to enable hot reload, get the package as you will see. I can have everything as I'm working. It's very good. We needed Arabic, RTL, right to left support. That will be the main topic of this, so we'll come back to it. There is a great CLI. To start, you need to install npm install React Native and this init project, and you get it. You get ES6 and ES6 2015 whatever, with out of the box with Babel and so on. You don't need to spend a week setting up Webpack, so that's nice. And looks and feels native, and then there is Code Push, which is not strictly from React Native. It works with Cordova as well, but it's very nice. Code Push allows you to be able to update your application on the fly without having to go through the App Store or through Google Store. So the way React Native works, it has this core JavaScript, and as long that runs on your app, and they did a lot of effort of making it super fast, because actually they use it. They use React Native for products, for actual products, for their Facebook ad manager, for example. So they made a big effort to make it super fast. So anything, if you update your app and it doesn't involve adding anything native, any new plugins, or basically changing the Android manifest, you can update your app on the fly. You have like an evergreen app that all the users have the latest version, which is amazing, because for us, we wanted to get it out as soon as possible, and if it breaks, we find a way to fix it. The confusing part, probably Reactor Redux, if you haven't done Reactor Redux before. Styling and layout, which is with RTL support, will be the main topic of the next part. Routing, I still don't know how to do routing properly, to be honest, in React Native. If someone has more experience, please tell me. Boilerplates, there were a couple of boilerplates. We started with Ignite. It was just too much. We throw it away, and we kind of ended up with most of the libraries used by Ignite, but at least it was by choice. We knew what we were doing by then. So the rest of the talk will concentrate about styling and layout, which are the bits that are a bit different from React on the web. So styling in React, first of all, it uses JavaScript objects inside your JSX. So if you didn't like React before because it mixes JavaScript with HTML, good news, now you also have to put CSS or styling with that. So just you will hate it more probably now. But it's the way that it works here in JavaScript. So if I want to do this text, have some style for it, every component have a style properties, and then you can do things like color red, and that's styled here, there. The next step will be probably to take it in my style, sorry for the names. And you can say my style, because like that, and you still get the red. And this is the experience I'm talking about, hot loading happening on the fly. So you use objects inside. You have, it's not, so since it's JSON, you have some things that don't work in CSS. You cannot have a dash in the name, so it becomes, it looks a bit different. And you can use objects, and you can pass object, you can mix objects, you can do this, and then font size 24. Oh, I broke it. Yeah, so you can do that. And all the core components, like I said, they have a style. You can mix, you can have an array, spread it, and add things, and override it with the last one. You can use just objects like that, but there is style sheet. You should use style sheet. And style sheet style sheet 0 is not a valid style, or style sheet color orange. Can someone say why it's not working? I knew this would happen. Yeah. My style.
The equivalent of class name, right? Key in the object that contains the styles.
Yeah, like this.
There you go.
Yeah, something like that. So you with stylesheet.create you get some elements performance boosts from React Native. Mostly that it uses, so like I said, it has these components that are it uses native components, but then with stylesheet.create there is a bridge basically in the architecture which is between the native part of it and the JavaScript part. And if you use stylesheet.create, it makes some clever stuff to be able to reuse, not go through the bridge between native and JavaScript every time. It kind of caches it, gives it an idea, and reuses it when it's needed, when it needs to do that. There is no inheritance. There is a bit like some. There is no inheritance in general. It's not cascading. That's the next slide that we'll talk about, which can be a bit weird. But there is limited inheritance in text components only. So you can, if we have here style for the next one, and we say color. What else can we say? Color red. So the top one has font size 22. So it inherited the font size from the top one and overridden this just for color. So it has this basic inheritance that we can make use of in text. But it doesn't have cascading in general, which is, I hate CSS, as Pablo interviewed me, and I told him in the interview that I hate CSS, don't make me do it. So I really hate it. But then when I started doing React Native, actually it's not like, it's not bad. You need that. Like, you have an app, you built all your things, and you want to do, you want to change the font in all your app. In CSS would be very easy, top level, and you do that, but there is no cascading here. So what do you do for that? As I said, style inheritance is limited to text subtrees. The recommended way that they recommended, well, from React in React Native documentation, is to use components for your things, for anything that you want to do. So I have here, for example, a component that's called slide title, and that it uses composition. It has the text and defines its text. It defines the style or whatever, and I use it, and I just pass it props.children, and I use it. Then if I need to change the slide title everywhere, I just have to update that one place, and that propagates. So I think even text, like in the documentation they say don't use text, use your own thing, my app text, and make it contain text from the start. And I think it's actually what you need to do. Otherwise, you'll end up very quickly with a lot of text all over the place, and you want to style them together, and you don't know how to. So start with your own components that contain text and contain the other stuff. Do you guys know what's yoga in the context of React? Good, at least you know it. So, yoga, sorry to disappoint you, it's not really about yoga. This thing is about the layout engine that React Native uses, which is called Yoga. And it's one of the biggest core parts of React Native. It's built by Facebook as a layout engine that's not specific to a certain platform. It has ports to so many different languages, and it's based on Flexbox, but with a bit of differences. And it's the engine that they use for React Native, but it's not really just for React Native. It's just a layout engine for anything that solves some problems that Facebook team saw that exist with CSS, with layout engines in Android and iOS and everything else. It doesn't. It's just about layout. It doesn't support anything, any styling or so on. It's just about it's about layout basically. It uses Flexbox, so most of what you need to do in React for layout and so on, it's Flexbox. If you've done Flexbox before in web, it's mostly the same. There are a few differences. First of all, that everything that you don't have display block, inline block, whatever, everything is actually Flex component. The other difference that the default on web is row. The direction is row. In React Native is column. So everything by default will be stacked one on top of it or the other. There is a lot about Flexbox, and it was actually surprisingly confusing when I was doing this. It took me. It's for the first time ever. I actually went and I looked at the standard of anything, like went to W3C and just looked at it because it was killing. I just couldn't grasp it. But it boils down like there are these bits about flex direction and justify content, align items, align self. As I said, I will just see the effect of these things. So if you think of flex, you basically tell it the direction of where you want to stack things, and then it fills the space with what you need. You don't need the floating, you don't need that 50%, 20% things for whatever from CSS days. You can just tell flex, this is, I want you to fill this space in this direction, and that's it. So the direction is by default column. So when this was no flex direction, it put, I have this in this view. I have the slide title and I have the other view with items list, and there is a parent and there is a container. The parent tells how you want to align things, how to align the children, and then the children get aligned basically. So if I say row, this becomes like this. If I say align flex end, it goes to the end of it. If I say flex start, it's at the start of it. So flex align items from the parent container tells where the children should go. Justify content, it tells it to have equal space between each children. Same here, item list. If I tell it to do it in row, it will go fill the space. If I tell it to wrap with flex wrap, then it wraps. So it's this few properties that you can do any layout that you think about. You can do it with these few properties. There are more, and there is very good documentation on this the layout properties about. You can override whatever. You can do anything really, but only with this four, you'll probably be able to do any layout that you do very easily. And then Yoga takes care of not just rendering it properly and actually optimizing it for the device. So if it's for Android uses this nested views. And a lot of the times you don't need many of these. They are just wasteful. It's like using divs for pushing things the old school way, or having divs for borders and tables, things like that. There's a lot of that in Android, and it just optimizes that for you, and that's good. Also, the Yoga engine that they did, RTL is a first-class citizen, like they say in the documentation. I don't know, did anyone have to do any RTL website or applications before? They're painful. They can be painful. So it's, Arabic is my first language. I did a lot of them, and it was like a selling point for me at some point, but it's a bad selling point. It's like saying that, IE6 or something. You don't really, you don't want to emphasize it most of the time. So that's RTL. It's really painful when on the web on any platform. I did it with WinForms, so like that's the worst of two worlds. Like RTL with WinForms. It's just lots of hacks and lots of things. CSS has good text alignment stuff, but the thing that maybe some of you don't know about RTL that actually in RTL everything needs to be mirrored. So a book in Arabic starts from the right to left. The direction is opposite. If you have a slider that comes from the left on your English app in Arabic or in Farsi or in Hebrew, it needs to come from the other side. So that's really painful to do. If you have margins, so Bootstrap used to have, you have all these left margins or left, right, whatever for positioning. And then there was npm plugin to just go through that and change every left to right and every right to left to get it working in Arabic. It's painful. So Yoga has that in mind, and that's a good thing about React Native in general, that it's Facebook is using it, and it's for their ad manager, and that's their core business. And like there are 26 countries that speak languages right to left, so they have the Hebrew and Arabic version that goes at the same time with the English version of their app when they update. So they do the things because they actually need them, and then you get the benefits of them pushing that as someone individual building an app as well. So it supports RTL, RTL, like I said, first-class citizen, and that means that for margin, padding, things like that, you have margin top, margin left, and these things you can say, but you also have start and end, and you have flex start and flex end like I did now, which is amazing. It's like a simple idea, but it's amazing because that means the engine knows when you say something align this flex end, it knows in English it's left, in Arabic it's right. It just knows that. You don't need to do anything else. Instead of doing your position absolute left or whatever, you just say start, then how many the offset, and that works in both languages. You don't need to change anything. So these are not standard in Flex. They are not standard in CSS, but they are part of Yoga, and they are what makes they make supporting RTL very easy. I did so. This now switches the app to RTL, and like you see, you have the Arabic bit, but you also have everything is the next came to the other side, and the back to will be in that side, and even the arrow here, it was pointing that way. The arrow needs to go that way, so everything really needs to be switched. Most of the things work out of the box, but then if you need things like this arrow, for example, that needs to be switched, so you can just have it exposes. There is I18 internationalization manager, part of React Native, and you just get this RTL. When you need to override something, you can just say, is it RTL, do this or do that. So for something like image that have direction, you can just scale with like the CSS, transform it the other way around just by checking it is RTL. And that's the other good thing about just having JSON as styling, because you can have actually logic inside your CSS, which is extremely powerful actually. So it makes RTL very easy. In the app that we built has a bit more. That's in Arabic. You have the slider coming from this side, the animation goes the right place, everything actually just works very easily. Let's switch back to English. So layout, RTL is good, RTL is very easy. And that's it actually, that's the end. So that's yoga for you guys. Like I said, I work with Code Your Future, and we teach, it's a project that teaches, it's been in London since October. We teach refugees and asylum seekers programming, React Native, Node, 6 months course. Our class in London is just finishing right now. It's totally run on volunteers without funding, and there are about 5 of us who actually teach in the class here. Can you Yeah, there
Yeah.
is Will,
Maybe a
Tim,
couple of students even.
Tim, yeah, Carlos, and there are at least who else? Michael, one, who's one of the students as well. It's a project that's going on. We rely on people. We run it without funding. We don't think we need funding, but there are small things. For example, now we're looking for people to get code complete and JavaScript, the good parts for 14 students. And we just have a social media campaign, and people donate it if they have an old copy or so on. So if you look at at Your Future handle or my handle on Twitter, there is a link. If you get us a book, if you just follow us, if you want to volunteer to help, please do. You don't need to teach. You can do things like supporting, there are homeworks, supporting the syllabus, supporting everything. If you are hiring as well, these are actually really good developers, regardless of the background. I myself come from the same background, so they can code, they can do very good code. So please, if you're hiring, think out of the box, because that's what we all try to do in this industry. There are 8 who are just graduating from the London class. They wouldn't mind going up to Edinburgh. So if you're hiring, come talk to me. They are good Node and React developers. And that's it, yoga, yeah. Any questions?
Yeah, I was interested in the RTL stuff you were using up there. But how do you translate English to the languages?
How does it what, sorry?
How do you translate from English to Arabic?
So,
Manually by yourself?
no, there is a library called React Internationalization, I think, and that's basically you can have a resource file in both English and Arabic and everything that you use, you rely on having reading it from that resource file instead of being hard-coded.
Okay.
You could load it from the server side if you want, or you can have it embedded in the app, and it works. Yeah.
Follow on question from that is based on experience that I had trying to write Arabic.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
The question I have is based on trying to write Arabic programming of early 90s technology.
Yeah.
Windows 16-bit technology, which was just a nightmare.
It was a nightmare, yeah.
Fucking nightmare.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The big problem then was to join the Arabic characters correctly.
Yeah.
Because when you write, you don't just write the characters individually.
Mm.
As they combine, you have a different meaning.
Yeah, true.
Like a join. Is that handled?
That's handled there. So that is not a problem anymore in general. So before you could do an Arabic, you write the website or anything, but someone who doesn't have Arabic installed of their PC, they just have broken characters. Welcome. I actually saw a guy who had a tattoo with broken characters. So it can be even worse. So yeah, that was a big problem. You copy paste the Arabic text and it just gets broken. And for someone who knows Arabic, it would be just doesn't make any sense. That's not a problem in general anymore. You don't need to install anything specific. And
It's the first time I've come across this in 25 years.
yeah.
Just reminded me.
It was a horrible problem until like
People from Sudan like you, I think, as well.
yeah.
You're from Sudan?
Yeah.
My friends are from Sudan, so they used to teach me lots of silly phrases.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about these as well. Yeah.
I'm not a front-end developer, but I see that you are using components in React Native.
Yeah.
I think I read sometime that you can use inside of React Native polymer components. Is that true?
I don't know. I don't think so. Does anyone knows? Can you use Polymer inside React Native? No, I don't think so. I don't. Is anyone using Polymer in real projects, real life projects? I think it's still it's a nice idea, but I don't.
No,
think
you
it's
already
idea.
have production
Yeah.
websites in user and you're using polymer
Polymer,
components.
okay.
Lots of things already
Yeah.
using polymer components. But React, but I think I'm reading some article that
Could be,
can
yeah.
be used with React, but I'm not a front-end developer, so
It
maybe-
could, it's probably, so people do use React Native with, even with Angular sometimes. There are things that happen that are not necessarily good ideas, but yeah, they exist. Yeah.
So basically, the idea, I think, is more or less the same. You have the web components so that you define, so
Yeah.
that you can reuse them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like this one.
How easy is it to use the foreign function interface from React Native to call Java or C?
So when I did Cordova, I had to do a bit of native Java code to get through some problems. The only bit I had to do here is for supporting RTL, you need to allow to trigger a function in the Java code, I didn't have to do anything I needed. So the app that we do is it uses GPS, it uses a lot of native, a couple of native components, and they are all the standard ones. You can just use them out of the box, and they're very good. So I don't even think I would, but if you have to, it's not hard to do that. Shouldn't be hard. Yeah, there are good guides for that, but I mean the point of doing React Native is to avoid, for us at least, was to avoid doing Java or Objective-C or so on.
You mentioned that you're using this only for Android, didn't you? But it should be also possible to use other platforms. How easy is it?
It's very easy. It's from, if I say React, this is what I need. React Native run Android. To get it on Android, I can say run iOS, and I get the iOS package. The reason we didn't do it is because iOS store is blocked in Sudan because of the US embargo. So, because terrorists like to code apparently. So, so we didn't care about iOS, but we can get an iOS app out of the box, out of the same code base immediately.
I think in the example you show us, you created your own style sheet for changing the color to orange.
Yeah.
How is it by importing the style sheet? Is it any different?
Yeah, no. So I actually import is like normal React. So I have here the styles, and I export it, and then I import it in other places here. So you can just use ES6 imports and modules. So you can put them somewhere else. You can structure your code the way that you see fit here. Yeah, you don't have to mix it inside, but you're still basically using JSON to style your components. Good, cool. Cheers. Thank you, guys.
So while Tim sets up here, like I mentioned, our sponsors Get Kraken, and we'd like us to put a little video up to explain what they do, in case you're not familiar.
Welcome to Git Kraken, a powerful new way to interact with your Git repos. This video will cover the basics of using GitKraken and is intended for users already familiar with how Git works. Let's begin. The push and pull buttons are on the toolbar here. This one will push the current branch, and this one will either fetch or pull the remote branches. You can set the default action by clicking here and then selecting one of the circular icons next to each option. Operations that involve two branches can be performed by dragging one branch onto another. This includes merging, rebasing, and even starting a pull request if your repository is hosted on GitHub or Bitbucket. Merging and rebasing require the branch to be on your local repo, which is shown by this icon. If it's not, simply double-click the branch to check it out, then proceed with your merge or rebase. Pull requests require the branch to be pushed to a remote repo, which is shown by these icons. Operations that are for a single branch can be performed by right-clicking on a commit. From here, you can create a branch, cherry-pick a commit, reset a branch to a specific commit, and revert a commit. If you right-click a commit that is the head of a branch, you'll have more options, which include pushing and pulling a branch that is not currently checked out, as well as merging, rebasing, and starting a pull request. Finally, if any of this goes wrong, the undo button will take you back to a previous state of the repo. This is really handy if you commit or perform a merge incorrectly and want to go back. You're now ready to use GitKraken, the free, standalone, cross-platform Git client. Download it today at gitkraken.com to unleash your repo.
So it's free. They're also offering a $10 off pro account. So the code there is like this. Thank you. GitKraken. It's an extra features, commercial use. Commercial use, yeah. Free.
Are we still live? We're still live? Yeah, I'll take something. Just tweet. I think go for it.
Okay, I'm just gonna get started then, I guess. Hey everyone, thanks for attending with some really great talks. Didn't know anything about React Native before, and learned a lot about higher components, so it was cool. This one is not going to be very technical, so it dives a bit more into the organizational, and might not apply to all of your situations, but I hope we're going to take something back anyway. So I'm Tim, that's where you find me online. I work for Skyscanner as a software engineer in the, so just 2 stories down from here, in the design systems team. We're just 3 folks in a team, hi to James and Matt, who are here in the audience. And we build and maintain our design system, which is called Backpack. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what is a design system, because not everyone might be familiar. practices that we apply when building and rolling out Backpack, and some obstacles we've encountered and maybe still encounter today. And there's also going to be some Lego because it's a cool metaphor for a lot of stuff. Right. So this is a quote from our documentation site actually. Backpack is a collection of design resources, reusable components and guidelines for creating Skyscanner products. So you might have heard the term style guide maybe, or pattern library. Actually a design system is a lot of different stuff. And today we're going to focus more on the upper left part about components, processes, dev standards here. So as part of our work, we ship components, and in that case it's React components. And that is an important distinguishment you have to make. So we're not building one application, but instead we build a lot of components that then other development teams use in their applications. So we have to think about things like reusability, whereas when you're building a one-off thing, you might not have to think about that. It also means that our relationship to the teams that consume our stuff is actually really important. So Backpack is based on something that's called atomic design. Those are atomic design principles by a developer named Brad Frost. We adapted that a bit, but basically it's all about taking a large system and breaking it down into smaller and smaller things. And the way that we've named it here, we have bonds on a very, very low level, which are immaterial things like color and spacing. Then we have atoms, which are already small elements like input fields or buttons. With molecules, which are slightly more complex, so you could think about date pickers or accordion components. And organisms are already parts of an application. So, for example, in case of Skyscanner, when people search for flights, it could be the search form. And systems then basically represent whole applications. So yeah, basically they're all built on top of each other. And so our team sees React components basically at the atoms and molecules level. And now we use Lego a lot internally to basically get a couple of our ideas across, to explain the relationship between different parts of the system. So when I was working on this talk, I basically looked for Lego planes on Google, and I stumbled upon this Flickr group, which was really amazing, where people would post photos of their Lego planes they built, and that one is pretty amazing, right? I mean, it's so detailed. They're both not finished, but they're scale models of real planes, and they're just built from basic Lego parts. And we have this one, which is quite different, so to say. And then lastly that. So undisputable, all three of them are planes, right? But they're not compatible with each other at all. So you can't share things like wings or engines or anything. And the reason for that is that they're all based on a different level of abstraction. And when we're building a design system of reusable components, it's crucial that we get this level of abstraction right. And React helps us a lot with that. So we don't just want to drop a bunch of millions of small components on people and say, here, use that. That's great for creativity when you're actually building something out of Lego. But when you build applications, that's not something that you want. You want a bit more structure and reusability. That often means that you have to strike a balance between control and individual autonomy of the teams that use the things, and between consistency and flexibility. And React helps us here. So here are a couple of practices that we use when building the design system. I've grouped them into encapsulation, choice, and composition. So first up, encapsulation. Every component that we build is its own NPM package. So there are design systems that just ship all the components as one big thing, but we ship them all individually. And each component consists of markup, JavaScript, and also styles. And Mustafa talked about style sheets in the JavaScript. We're not doing that, so that's a possible solution for that. There are CSS and JS solutions like Style.jsx, for example. We're not using that. We're using Sass. I'm gonna get to why a bit later. And it also means that we ship these components untranspiled. So they just come like this, and the consumer, so the teams that actually then build the applications, have to transpile them, have to run them through Babel and Webpack and everything. But providing everything out of the box has a couple of advantages. Basically, it reduces the amount of mismatches between the component code, the markup, and the styles, which could happen when there are different versions of these things. But if we ship everything out of the box, then there's no chance for that. And let me go a bit more into detail what other advantages that has. So Mustafa also talked about right-to-left support. What we try to do is when we build components is to make them as accessible as possible, and that screen reader and keyboard accessibility. And we also try to build in support for right-to-left. So let's actually, please tell me that's okay?
It's very good, yeah.
Yes! We didn't have the Arabic speaker to test this. We had a speaker of Parsi. So, yeah, shipping everything out of the box just reduces the amount of mistakes that people can make when they have to mesh things up or implement things themselves. And okay, they can still mess up the accessibility, but shipping everything with support for basic accessibility raises the level of accessibility in general on the whole site. We also put theming ability into our components. So these two are the same component, we just use a different theme. And right now we employ build time theming. So there's a term called design tokens, which you might not have heard of. Basically, it's a way to theme using just variables. And in terms of atomic design, that would be bonds. So you can switch them out, like things like colors and spacing at build time, and then create a different theme. We're not employing runtime theming yet. We were looking at different options here, but haven't really settled on anything. And basically, shipping that out of the box avoids teams just overriding each other's styles. So, like when you use Bootstrap, for example, and you need one button to look slightly different, you override the style for that button. Then another team comes, puts their styles on the page, and overrides that again. It's just going to be a mess. So this way we try to avoid that. So when we ship components, most of them, actually all of them, we try to keep functional stateless components. So we heard about that in the higher order component style. They're stateless, and most of them are functional. You don't need to use lifecycle hooks. But we also ship stateful containers for common use cases. For example, this is our accordion. By default, it's stateless, but we're also shipping the same package a container that can be configured so that either multiple pins can be open, like here in the GIF, or only one can be open and automatically close the others. And if there are teams that need a different behavior, or they need to manually open or close panes on certain events, for example, they can still roll it themselves, right? They can write another container for this, but they don't have to re-implement the whole accordion. Another example of that is our date picker. So we do have a calendar component, which is stateless. It's not entirely stateless, it has local state for which month is selected, but it doesn't keep track of which date is selected or focused. Then we have a date picker, which wraps that and provides the stateful addition to that. Next up, composition. So we, from time to time, we just discover some common patterns across all our applications, and this here is about search form or any sort of form where you have a submit button, and when you submit, the button gets disabled and shows a spinner, basically just for the time of an HTTP request. So we had a lot of teams just implementing that themselves. We have button component, item components, spinner components, so people can just do that. And this is a very minimal example. So, for example, the colors are hard-coded. It doesn't cover any edge cases. We have more than just one button style. We have secondary buttons and large buttons. So, yeah, didn't really fit any more code on this page here. But there are lots of places for this to go wrong. And lots of duplicate work as well. So what we did is we created a loading button component that basically encapsulates that behavior. And if you look at this, it's not really, we didn't really create anything new. We just composed those three components together, put them into one, and gave them a slightly nicer interface. This is still stateless, so the consumer is still responsible for setting the loading state to true or false. And yeah, this is all easily possible by leveraging React's amazing component and composition model. I kind of feel this would have fit very well to our first talk today. Yeah, but not all is great in component land, so it doesn't really solve all of our problems. We also ran into some obstacles, some of which we have solved, and some that require more ongoing work. So one of our main issues is that we're not building something new, but we're trying to roll out this design system to all our existing applications. And the teams at Skyscanner use all kinds of different technology stacks. And we have a couple of Angular applications. We have a lot of Backbone and some CoffeeScripts, because that was very in 3 years ago. The issues here is that no product owner will give teams prioritization for just rewriting an application. And rewriting is also great risk and very expensive. Also, we're still in the process of developing that design system, so we don't provide all the components that people might need. And also, this might be tested on a small scale. You can build one application, but at Skyscanner there are different code bases contributing to the same page. So we don't really know what effect that will have on performance or conflicts of different elements in the page. So I'll have to be very careful. So yeah, there are some things that we can do to make this a little bit easier. And first thing is to provide different upgrade paths. So for all atoms, so for all the small components like buttons and inputs and so on, we provide SAS mixins and variables that people can use to achieve the same look. So this way we can achieve visual consistency fast and cheap. This is the reason why we use SAS and have that as extra style sheet files. And we can't use something like CSS in JS. And if you look, right, that's one example. We just recently released not a rebrand, more like a refresh of some of our web properties. And this is all using Backpack, but it's not using the React components. But the buttons are Backpack style, like these cards are, accordion, colors, quite a lot. But this is all just using SAS. And I wouldn't have been able to release it that quickly. Even that process took quite a while. if we had demanded for everyone to rewrite everything in React. So if you want to go a bit more complex and use molecule level things that all like calendars or accordions that also provide functionality, it's not that simple. So what you can do is you can embed individual components directly using a React DOM, right? So you can treat a date picker like it was its own application, and then just provide a callback if the date changes. In two of our Angular applications, we have successfully used ng React, which wraps an individual component and makes it available as an Angular directive. There's a more modern alternative, React to Angular, which I haven't checked out. And just a couple days ago, Dan Abramov, who works on the Facebook team, received quite a nice documentation pull request. So someone had started to write guides for how to integrate React into other libraries and frameworks, and that's something that's been missing quite a bit. So if you're not starting something new, you need to integrate it into existing applications without a whole rewrite. That's something to keep, to take a look at and keep an eye on. So, by the way, the blue things are links, and I'm going to upload the slides later, so you can always come back to that. Another thing we do is we provide common tools to make the transition easier. So, I don't know if you've heard, probably most of you, of Create React App. It's a small command line application by Facebook that just bootstraps a new React client-side application and abstracts the whole shebang away, like the whole Webpack configuration that you usually need 5 days for, but that's a matter of 30 seconds now, and things like linting, and it's really great. And what we did is we created a different template for it. You can do that when you pass the scripts version flag. And that template comes out of the box with a couple of backpack components and with our own styling configuration and ESLint configuration. And if you can't use that because you're not creating something new, you can still use the linter configuration or take a look at the Webpack config. And if it's still too difficult for folks to get started with this, we try and get our hands dirty. So we talk a lot to the development teams in Skyscanner, and sometimes it just pays off to take the time to dig into their code bases because they don't have time or they don't have the knowledge. So you see and try help them get up to speed with things. And that may mean building one-off solutions to specific problems that they have. In one case, for example, our support team, so the one that manages our help site, wanted to use Backpack icons because the icons are the same as in the app, for example. They can use them to refer to certain menu items in the app. But our help site is basically, I guess, some sort of CMS or Zendesk or I don't know. But it gives them very limited control, but they can paste some CSS in. So we wrote a little tool that just compiles down SAS mixins for our icons into CSS. They can just paste in and then use the icons in the CMS. And in other cases, we help the team by just moving their build process to Webpack, and that's already a good start because from there they can start using things like SAS Loader, which enables them to use our components. Which if their build process was based on Gulp, they couldn't do that. So as a last example, is a very Skyscanner specific example maybe, but I guess maybe not. But it's a good example for rather large applications. So this is about how it all comes together. So single site on skyscanner.net can be maintained by a bunch of different teams. You can imagine one team just being responsible for the header, or let's not talk about teams, let's talk more about code bases. So it's not one code base. You have the header as one code base, the body is another, and the footer of the page is a third code base. And because the header doesn't really get updated that often, the version of the button component there is quite out of date. You have to imagine if those code bases are maintained by different teams, they can just release in their own time, so that can happen. We used to have like 6 weekly releases or so. That was way before I joined the company. Now every team releases at least once a day, if not once every 2 hours. So something like that can happen quite quickly. And you have some JavaScript in that version, you have some CSS in that version, some CSS in that version, and some other CSS in that version. And how do you avoid these overriding each other? They're all in the same browser context, so man, crap. So one technique that we've employed is CSS modules. So we use it in a couple of components. We're trying to roll it out to more as we go. And that basically scopes certain, it scopes one style sheet down to a certain selector, which would mean you can have all these 3 buttons, different versions of one button on the page without any conflicts. And yeah, CSS and JS would be the perfect solution, like Mustafa shown, where you just put styles on a certain component, and in case of a browser it would just be inline styles. But because of the upgrade path, we can't really do that yet. We'd like to, because it will also enable us to do React Native, which we can't right now with that solution. There's an obvious drawback here. That looks like some duplicated code on the same page, with just slight differences. Okay.
I think it's
It's dead.
Okay, I was nearly done, so it's the second last slide.
Can you describe it? Sorry about that.
No worries. So yeah, that's an obvious drawback. It's an obvious drawback, but it's something that we say is worth the trade-off. The trade-off is worth doing that. It's not as big of a problem, but we'll see, as we haven't really encountered that situation yet. So yeah, that's us using React and especially the React ecosystem. So basically, you could probably swap out React for another Vue library, but the whole ecosystem and especially the composition model, that Skyscanner to scale our design system. And once again, yeah, that's me. Thank you. Last slide.
last slide is important.
Questions ready?
Right, we're hiring as well, especially so for my team specifically. So if you want to help us build a design system and fight all these problems, so get in touch. Any questions?
I was very curious about what you said of keeping each component as its own package. Then how do you handle these? Like, I can think of a million problems which maybe have very smart solutions.
Dependencies?
Yeah, no, like for example, Git-wise, how do you handle that? Is it monorepo? It has its own Git repo?
Yeah, monorepo. So all the components are developed in the same repository, and we use Learner to just publish the packages individually and also manage the dependencies. And we had really good experiences with it. So I've seen other opinions in the design systems theme, so it seems to be a common problem. So people say, okay, the dependency management is too hard, and they just release their design system as a whole. But because all our teams go at different pace, we just thought that this would be the best model. It works really well for us.
Cool. And then when has it happened in your team or Skyscanner when that you want to share code between some of those components? What do you create an extra repo for like just very abstract dependencies, or like how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a really crappy situation that we had a couple of times. For example, we have a modal dialog, and we have a popover and a tooltip, and all these use React Portal, which is basically there so that you don't have to deal with Z indexes and so on if you want to position one thing above the whole page. So we have like a kind of a meta package that wraps React Portal and also wraps some other things that we reuse. And we notice now that it's getting bloated a bit. For example, the button, which uses CSS modules, and CSS modules is also abstracted in that package, and now the button ships with React Portal for no reason whatsoever. So we need to find a better model there. That's one approach. Maybe you need something like one package per wrapper, per utility. Not really sure. Matt, any ideas?
Pack 2, tree shaking.
Yeah, tree shaking, yay. Yes.
So the last company I was working with very recently, we were implementing a UI library, which is essentially making a component basically off the main tree, and it was all composed. However, there was a lot of arguments within the company because the company was based in Edinburgh, slight in South Africa, and also in the US. And there was a lot of arguments to the fact that it's like one person would actually develop something for a button and say, so I'm going to actually push through other props, therefore do a higher order component on top of this particular button, give additional functionality, and therefore you're descending to like, no, we're not doing this, we are doing this, we're not doing that. Obviously you've got a large team and you've got other teams as well. How did you get around that disagreement?
Yeah, we don't. So, like, pushing this design system is as much a technical problem as it is a people problem. So what my team does a lot is, well, we talk a lot to the people who are supposed to use it. So we call that evangelism. So we go out and try to teach people and try to convince people. And for example, the decision to use React as our main view library on the front end has not been a top-down decision. So it has been discussed within the developers in Skyscanner. Not all of them, obviously. You can't really do that by committee, but yeah. So we're still struggling. That's interesting. We run into problems, but we solve them as we go along. Right? You can't solve everything ahead. And yeah, the people part is really important. So what you also do, we visit other offices and get in touch with the developers there. So we're also distributed.
Yeah, we were trying to buy you for like ease of being developers, but it's like you have people with a lot of different ideas coming through. So it's almost as if you ask too many people, you get too many opinions, and it's almost as if you have to be selective. It's like, okay, we'll go to what we consider to be the lead within that particular department, rather than everybody in that department that maybe have more sway. It was a bit of a tricky. It was more diplomatic than anything else.
Yeah. So what I tend to think of is that this is not just making the user interface consistent for the user, people that use our site, but we also try to make a lot of things consistent within the development. So we're part of larger group of teams we call developer enablement. And as that, we try to get this idea across that it doesn't really matter if you want semicolons behind your statements or not. That's bike shedding, and we try to avoid that, and try to get people to be not that opinionated about really unimportant things. So that's why we can create things like an ESLint configuration and like a stylelint configuration and say, okay, this is how you should format your code. I'm sure you can still make exceptions, but it doesn't really matter. Like, yes?
Thanks for the talk. I just wondered if you could give us any insight into how you manage all the UX and UX testing around these components, and whether there's a risk that a component works in one context but not in another.
So, I mean, a lot of what we do is just building on existing things. So, if you think about the date picker, for example, picking dates is one of my favorite topics. I spent 1 month on that date picker. So, in the context of our flight search, for example, a date picker where you have something like a calendar view, a month view, and you can browse through months, works very well. But when you get to a booking process and people have to enter their date of birth, it doesn't work at all. And that's just it's a bit of common sense, a bit of looking into existing UX research, and also a bit of experience. Maybe James can say a little bit more. It's more on the design side of our team. But how do we manage that?
Yeah, I think a large part of it comes down to the kind of UX patterns that we want to see in our products, and we're kind of busy at the moment kind of establishing those patterns, formalising them within the team and agreeing on them so that we can get them into Backpack as a kind of reference point for people. I think when it comes to kind of global stuff as well, an example being that we had our kind of primary call to action, which our primary call to action button, which has been tested, a huge amount of time at Skyscanner, probably in a lot of places. It's one of the favourite things to test for some reason. But quite often we test those things in isolation. We test them in our results view, we test them on our kind of search form, but we never really test them kind of holistically, and that's really kind of problematic. We don't want to have 10 different call to action buttons just because it works in 10 different areas. So part of the move to using Backpack in our design system is that we're actually able to test those things more holistically. So that'll be kind of interesting as we get the kind of adoption of those components across the board. Quite often we're relying on teams that want to take a component and switch it out for something they're using currently to do that kind of experimenting testing for us, which isn't ideal, but it's kind of where we're at the moment, really.
So you never really test the same component in different contexts, but this allows you to do it.
Previously no, there was 100 different variations of something, and trying to move to that, so you've probably seen one of the call to actions we've got there, trying to move to that to the one we had previously was incredibly difficult. Trying to get all the teams to align, getting it prioritised at the same time, trying to get that as a global thing was just a nightmare. So we ended up choosing 2 of our most kind of high traffic areas of the site, and using that as a basis of it's not breaking anything here, then it's good to go type thing. Obviously we still kind of monitor stuff, but yeah, hopefully in the future doing those types of things will be much easier.
Do the user testing that affects your higher functions, the feedback you get from people using your components, change your functions,
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Higher
I'm
functions?
saying like when you're using your components,
Yeah.
if I got something you want to change, do you change in higher level function, or does that happen? Does feedback from using your components change in your higher functions?
No, mostly not. So when people have feedback on the component, they think it doesn't really, they need it to work in a slightly different way. And if they can make a good case for that. So first up, if it's a one-off thing, like only that team, only that application needs it, then it doesn't have to live with us. So people can build React components that are just used in their applications. And as long as they kind of work with the visual style, and those teams also have designers, so we can make sure that happens, then they don't have to be in our design system and maintained by us. But if that's something that we think makes sense, and we usually extend the component. So, for example, we recently added a new variation of the button, and basically what you do to get this new version of the button, you pass another prop in. So we don't use higher order components for that, but we just extend the actual component and release a new version.
Do you ever do any A/B testing on like optimizer or anything to get real statistics behind like what actually works and what doesn't?
We do a lot of A/B testing, but not on individual components. So the A/B tests we do are mostly focused on products or product features. So we never really do an old component, new component A/B test, I think.
Except for the button.
Except for the button, yes. And I think at some point it's also about striking a balance. I mean, you can A/B test everything, and just because there's a slightly higher conversion rate, even if it's statistically significant, and then you create 10 variations of one component because one works a little bit better here, one works a little bit better there, and then you sacrifice consistency again for conversion rate. So probably there are some people like Skyscanner who would hang me for this. Conversion rate isn't everything.
I might have got the wrong end of the stick, but I think you mentioned Angular and stuff as well.
Yeah.
And also with different versions of components, plus with CSS modules being tailored to each of the individual modules because they can be labeled per class. How the hell do you deal with the load? Because that's a large amount of obviously initial download before somebody gets to view the page. So how do you deal with that? Did you have a particular system in place to say we're not doing this, we're doing this, or not?
Not really enforcing anything. There are things you can do in terms of server-side rendering and high caching, and also externalizing some dependencies. So, for example, React and React DOM are externalized. So when people build the applications, they're not in their bundle, but instead we put them globally on the page. So it doesn't have to be done with every bundle, and also means you can, it's highly cacheable, and you can serve it by CDN, and so on and so forth. With the with the Angular applications that exist that have to bundle React components, that's a problem. Well, we still do that. So one of our applications, for example, is our booking process, basically, where you can really check out and buy a flight. And you have a seat selector there, and so that you can choose your seat on the plane. And the seat selector is built in React, but the rest of the application is Angular. So what we did is we just lazy loaded that one, because not every booking process has a seat selector, has seat selection, and it also comes quite late in the process. So it's not the very first thing that lands on the page that you have to see. So
are you lazy loading the React at that point, or are you lazy loading just the component?
React is on the page because it's globally on the page.
Okay, so you've got the React framework and the Angular framework on the same page as initial one. I don't mean this is not criticism. I'm just trying to work out.
No.
It should be though. There's loads of different techniques we can use. There's other in terms of there's only two Angular apps that are currently embedded React components. One of them isn't really like a main product that we ship to millions of users, so we can kind of get away with it there. And the other one that Tim's talking about is one of the things that we already had Angular on React on the page at the time, so got it for free, but there's definitely tools.
We're not particularly happy about having multiple
Well,
frameworks.
this is an upgrade path, isn't it? So
Yeah.
So you always have to upgrade. I just thought I'd ask how you got around it, but obviously you just have to suck it in.
Code splitting,
Go split.
that's what I would go down. Go down that route.
So at least you're hoping that they've got the cache version of the files. So obviously if they've been to your site before, they're going to have React and they're going to have Angular because you've split those off.
Yep.
Therefore you're just taking the hash version of whatever files you create for your application. That's cool. Alright,
Yeah,
cool.
that's the ideal idea.
Cool.
Okay. Are related, but do you use monorepos in general in Skyscanner? Or just your team? Do you have a strong opinion about that in Skyscanner? Monorepos in a single?
I mean, most teams in Skyscanner are product teams, so they build products and not packages that are released to different places. So I don't think that's a problem that many of us encounter. There are some teams who build libraries, for things like stats and performance metrics and stuff like that. I'm not sure what they do. I think they have separate repos per library. So now we don't really have any strong opinions. It works really well for our team.
That's great. Well, I guess that's it. I'd like to thank FanDuel again for the space. Excellent. Thank you, Kraken. Got some more t-shirts hanging around. Always hit something. We need speakers for the next meetups, so come and talk to us, send us an email, get in touch. Really, really welcome. Anyone wanting to get more information about Your Future, come and speak to us too. That's very, very welcome.
We have couple of we have Raresh. I don't know. Yeah, he's one of our main mentors coming from Glasgow specifically. So a couple of us will go for drinks and so on afterwards. You're welcome to join, and we can continue talking about React and Code Your Future.
That's it, guys. Thanks for coming. Thank you, everyone.